When I married, my mother-in-law couldn't hide her disdain. "I don't understand why you're still working," she sneered. "A woman's place is with her children at home." Gary, my husband, never defended me. He dismissed their cruel remarks, telling me to let it slide. But their words were like constant pricks, slowly tearing down my self-worth. With my own mother gone and my marriage falling apart, I found myself growing resentful of Gary. He had never truly been there for me, leaving me to bear the weight of his family's judgment alone. I vividly recall being pregnant with Amanda, hearing the barely concealed disappointment in his parents' voices when she was born. "Make sure it's a boy next time," they said, their dissatisfaction clear. It stung deeply, knowing my daughter had to endure their favoritism. Now, Gary wanted to use the inheritance I received to move us closer to his parents, pulling us deeper into their toxic influence. I couldn't let that happen. The thought made my blood boil. As I sat in the quiet, surrounded by my mother's belongings, I began to make a plan. I refused to be a passive participant in my own life any longer. I was going to fight for myself and for my children. Over the next few days, I gathered every document I could find, preparing for the legal battle that was sure to come. My lawyer, a sharp and reassuring woman named Miss Kathleen, said, "We have a strong case, Denise." With that, I knew there was no turning back. I was going to stand my ground, for my dignity and my children's future. Then one evening, while going through my mother's things, I stumbled upon an old envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside was a collection of stock certificates and property deeds, revealing the fortune she had quietly built, over $6 million in assets. My hands trembled as I realized the magnitude of her wealth. She had always lived modestly, but this was her careful planning for our future. There was a note in her familiar handwriting. "Denise, I saved this for a rainy day. I hope it brings you and the kids a better life. Use it wisely." Tears welled in my eyes as I felt my mother's love and protection, as though she were embracing me from beyond. The next day, I went to find Gary. He was lounging in the living room, flicking through a magazine. "Gary, we need to talk," I said, my voice unwavering. He glanced up, annoyance in his eyes. "What now, Denise?" This time, I was prepared. This time, I wouldn't back down. I held up the envelope and said, "I found something my mother left behind. She left me stocks and properties worth $6 million. Gary's eyes went wide, his face betraying both shock and greed. "$6 million? That's incredible," he exclaimed, his voice brimming with eagerness. I met his gaze with resolve. "Don't get any ideas, Gary. This money is mine," I said firmly, repulsed by his reaction. This inheritance was a symbol of my mother's love and foresight, a gift meant to secure a better life for me and the kids. "You won't see a penny of it," I added, watching his expression darken. "You can't keep it all to yourself, Denise. We're married. What's yours is mine," he shot back. I felt my anger rise. "Is that all you care about, Gary? You don't see me or the kids, you just see dollar signs," I said, realizing how much he had changed. Gary stood up abruptly, his face flushed with rage. "You're being selfish, Denise. I'm thinking about our family's future," he yelled. "What family, Gary? The one you'd sell out for your own gain?" I shot back, incredulous. He took a step toward me, fists clenched. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure of it," he threatened. But I didn't flinch. "Bring it on, Gary. I'm not afraid of you anymore." With that, he stormed off, leaving me to collect my thoughts. I knew this was just the beginning of a long and bitter fight, but I was ready for my children, for my mother's legacy, and for myself. The following week was a blur of legal meetings and tense silences at home. Gary's initial shock had turned into cold, calculated aggression. One evening, after the kids were asleep, he cornered me in the kitchen, his eyes wild with fury. "You think you're clever, Denise, hiding that money from me?" he snarled. My heart raced, but I stood my ground. "It's not about being clever, Gary. It's about doing what's right. That money is for me and the kids, not for your selfish desires. I'm your husband. I'm entitled to that money," Gary growled, slamming his fist on the counter, making me flinch. His words were venomous, but I wouldn't back down. "Entitled to what, Gary? To a woman who refuses to be bullied into giving you everything?" I retorted. meeting his glare. His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure you don't see a cent of that money," he spat, his voice thick with malice. But even as fear bubbled inside me, his threats only made me more resolute. I was going to protect what my mother had entrusted to me. "Is that a threat?" I demanded, standing tall as he leaned in close, his breath hot with anger. "It's a promise," he hissed. I stepped past him, my heart pounding, but my determination unshakable. "We'll see about that. The court will decide," I said, walking away as his venomous words echoed behind me. "You'll end up with nothing," he hissed. The next day, my lawyer called. "Denise, Gary has filed for divorce. He's claiming half of your inheritance," she informed me. I took a deep breath. "Let him try. I'll fight him every step of the way." Miss Kathleen's voice was confident. "Don't worry, Denise. We have a strong case. Justice will prevail." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about my children, sleeping peacefully. This battle wasn't just for me, it was for their future. Gary had become a stranger to me, consumed by greed, but I was no longer the woman he thought he could intimidate. As I drifted off to sleep, I imagined standing tall in court, the judge before me, fighting not just for money, but for my dignity, my children's future, and the quiet strength my mother had instilled in me. The legal battle was fierce. Gary's strategy was obvious, to paint me as a selfish wife hoarding the family's resources. But his arguments were weak, built on desperation rather than truth. During a mediation session, he sat across from me, his lawyer by his side, his face cold and smug. "Let's be reasonable, Denise," his lawyer said smoothly. "Gary is entitled to part of this inheritance. It's only fair." I glanced at Miss Kathleen, my resolve unshaken. "Fair?" I said, my voice steady. "Gary has done nothing to deserve this inheritance. It was left to me by my late mother, specifically for me and my children." Gary's claim to my inheritance was more than a legal issue, it was a moral one. My mother had worked tirelessly to save this, not for Gary's whims, but for the future security of her grandchildren. This inheritance wasn't just money, it was her legacy. I was ready to fight with everything I had. Gary leaned in, his voice dripping with contempt. "Seriously, Denise, you're just being petty. Don't you think the kids would want their father to have a part of this?" A rush of anger surged through me. "This isn't about pettiness, Gary. It's about what's right," I snapped, my words sharp. "You've never once considered what's best for the kids. This is about your greed." His lawyer tried to interrupt, but Gary dismissed him with a wave. "You think you're going to take it all, don't you, Denise? Play the grieving daughter, the wronged wife." I met his glare, my voice steady but firm. "This isn't a game, Gary. You're the one trying to take what doesn't belong to you." The mediator, a stern woman, raised her hands to regain control. "Let's keep this civil. We're here to reach an agreement." Gary interrupted her, his voice rising. "Agreement? She's the one being unreasonable." The tension was thick, but I kept my composure. "I'm being reasonable, Gary. I'm protecting what my mother intended for her grandchildren. Your claims are without merit." We hit a standstill. The mediator called for a break. As we stood up, Gary leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear. "You'll regret this, Denise. I'll make sure of it." I walked out, my heart racing, but my resolve unwavering. His threats were empty, his case weak, and I knew the law was on my side. I was determined to see this through. In the weeks that followed, I dove into legal prep. Miss Kathleen and I went over every detail, ensuring I was ready for the battle ahead. The kids stayed with my sister, shielded from the chaos. I missed them terribly, but I knew this fight was for their future, as much as for mine. The day of the hearing arrived. Sitting in the courtroom, I felt a wave of strength, ready to defend my mother's legacy. I braced myself to face Gary and tear apart whatever distorted narrative he had concocted. This was the turning point, and I was prepared to protect my children's future and honor my mother's wishes. The courtroom was a battleground, where words were weapons. Gary's lawyer tried to paint him as a wronged husband, but under Miss Kathleen's sharp cross-examination, his arguments crumbled. During a break, Gary confronted me in the hallway, fury etched on his face. "You're ruining everything, Denise," he spat. "Do you really think you're walking away with all of it?" Despite the fear gnawing at me, I stood my ground. It's not your money, Gary. It never was. He closed the distance, his voice a venomous whisper. I'll drag this out as long as I can. I'll bleed you dry with legal fees. I met his gaze, unwavering. Do whatever you have to, I won't back down. When we returned to the courtroom, I felt a surge of power. Gary's threats were hollow, his arrogance masking desperation. The final verdict brought me the justice I deserved. The judge ruled in my favor, recognizing the inheritance as mine alone. Gary's defeated expression said it all. Though I had won the legal battle, my marriage had crumbled. The family I once knew was gone. In the weeks that followed, Gary's life fell apart. His reputation, once built on fear and manipulation, dissolved as people saw him for what he truly was, greedy and selfish. Word spread quickly about his downfall. He lost his job, his friends turned their backs on him, and his social standing vanished. His crash from grace was swift, and while I couldn't find joy in his misery, there was an undeniable sense of poetic justice. One evening, I received a phone call from a mutual friend. Denise, have you heard about Gary? I paused, curious. No. What happened? He's leaving town, lost his job, his house, he's practically destitute. A mix of emotions stirred inside me, not quite satisfaction, but something close. Gary's pursuit to destroy me had backfired. In the end, he had brought about his own undoing. After hanging up, I gazed at a photo of my children on the mantel. This battle had been for them, to secure their future. That night, as I tucked them into bed, a deep sense of peace washed over me. The fight was over, and we were stronger for it. Free from Gary's shadow, ready to embrace the next chapter. Life would be different, but we had each other, and that was all that mattered. In the months that followed the court's decision, life began to settle into a new rhythm. The victory brought closure, but it also marked the start of a healing process. I decided to sell our old house, a place filled with too many painful memories. Each item I packed was a step toward letting go of the past with Gary. I was focused on creating a better future for Amanda and Andrew. While going through old boxes in the attic, I came across a photo of Gary and me from happier times. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to mourn the life I had envisioned. The love I had once believed was real, but as I looked at his face in the photo, I realized the man I had married was no longer the same. He had revealed his true nature, dark and untrustworthy. With a firm motion, I tossed the photo into the trash, a symbol of finally letting go. We moved to a new town, and with it came a fresh start. I found a cozy home in a welcoming neighborhood, and the kids quickly adapted to their new school. I immersed myself in writing, finding comfort in creating new worlds. One evening, as I tucked Amanda into bed, she looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes and asked, "Mom, do you miss Dad?" The question caught me off guard. "Sometimes I miss who I thought your dad was," I replied softly, "but we're better off now." It was true. Despite everything, we had found a way forward, stronger and more united. "We're a strong team, just the three of us," I added, and she nodded with a wisdom that belied her years. "I like it here, Mom. I like our new home," she said, her words filling me with warmth. We had come so far. As I lay in bed that night, my thoughts returned to Gary's downfall. His greed and cruelty had backfired, leaving him with nothing. While I took no pleasure in his fall, there was justice in the outcome. The road ahead would be long, but we were finally on a path to healing. With the inheritance wisely invested, I knew it would secure their education and future. I closed my eyes, thinking of my mother. Her strength and foresight had been our salvation. She had given me the means to protect myself and my children. As I drifted to sleep, a sense of profound peace washed over me. The storm that once threatened to uproot our lives had passed, leaving clarity and hope in its wake. We had weathered the worst, and now, with a new day ahead, it felt like anything was possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay stunned.